I'm good here. You see me?
If you want to be closer to the camera, that will help.
You need to let me know when to
Both of
start.
you.
So we think we're using this camera, yeah?
We know what point to it. Yes.
Okay.
But the closer you are, the better. because
All right, good evening and welcome to the NYJavaSig event. Tonight's a very special event. We are trying to do a hybrid-like event. So we're here at Google headquarters in New York. Thanks to Lena and Google for hosting the space. Thank you very much. And this is like a practice session. We have all the leaders here as today. And we're trying to, on the next 16, correct? 16, we're going to do a networking event and then open to the public in person. We hope to see you there.
In person only, you get to see each other.
Oh, in person only. Thank you. As always, follow us on Twitter at NYJavaSig to be notified about future events of the NYJavaSig. We have monthly events, have hands-on workshops, a lot of good content free to you and to help you learn new things and get up to date with everything that's going on in the JV world. Today, we're gonna have Jeanne Boyarsky presenting. Jeanne is a Java champion and she has written, I don't know, 216 books and counting on certification. It's gonna be a very interesting session. So we're gonna learn about Java 17, how to refactor your application. During the presentation, Jeanne is gonna be asking questions and stay tuned, pay attention. If you answer correctly, you may, in some questions, receive a JetBrains license that's valid for 1 year for any of the JetBrains products, IntelliJ included. We're also going to have a license, Agile Learner license that's from Venkat Subramanian. So it has a lot of good content. This license is valid for 1 year for everything on this website. So thank you, Venkat, Agile Learner. Thank you, JetBrains. Without any further ado, Jeanne.
Thank you.
Good to see
We
you.
should
Good
do
to
a
be
high five in person.
person.
And as always, if you have any questions, do put them in the chat. Neha will read them out loud on your behalf. Similarly, if you answer a question and have the correct answer, Neha will say it out loud so I know what it is. Today's talk is refactoring to Java 17 and beyond. You might notice that it's not August 8th right now. It's soon to be August 8th, where I will be giving this presentation at KCDC, Kansas City Development Conference, at a real in-person conference. Today, you are my guinea pigs. If you see anything wrong, please do know. There are a few things you'll see in this presentation that are specific to KCDC because I want you to get that full experience. In particular, there's a number of references to a lab, which is going to be happening 2 days after the presentation. You can just ignore those parts. These are the sponsors of KCDC. They give you more free advertising because they're in this presentation too. And of course, as with all my presentations, we have another commercial. These are the books that I wrote. We have Java 8, Java 11, and Java 17. And people who come to KCDC will have the opportunity to win a book. But you have the opportunity to win a book too. I will be giving away a book at that August 16th meeting that Rodrigo mentioned to one of the people who appear in person. One of the interesting things about tech previews are that things go wrong. Everyone in the room is currently clustered around the computer, which makes me wonder what's going on, but they don't look panicked about it. So I'm going to assume that all is perfect and proceed as if that isn't happening. At the end of the session on August 8th, this presentation will be available on Speaker Deck. You will all have to wait in suspense until then. However, you can watch it on YouTube as many times as you want. Disclaimer, some of the material is from my books, belongs to me, and therefore is okay. All right. Now we can get started. I'd like everybody who's attending in YouTube to post in YouTube what version of Java you're on. I'm going to pause a little bit as that happens, and I'm going to ask Neha to summarize the results so that she doesn't have to read all of them out loud. The reason we're doing this is because a lot of people aren't on Java 17 yet, and it's helpful to know what the audience is. It's also helpful to know what your peers are using. I personally am using Java 11 for almost everything. I have one app that uses Java 8. It's titled Java 8 Test Cases. I'll let you imagine what that does. And I have one thing that uses Java 17, but it's not in production yet. So I'm going to say that I am safely on Java 11.
Why do people are on 11?
Okay,
but I'm still getting the answer.
is anybody on 8 or 17 yet?
Same with me.
I guess that went with 8.
Somebody's on 17 as well.
Nice.
18 as well, I think.
Ooh, we have people on non-LTS versions too. Sort of forget those exist sometimes. If you're on 11 or even 8, don't worry, this presentation is for you. I still have some slides about what you can do to get ready for being on Java 17 so that you can apply everything you learned here right away, even if you're not on 17 yet.
I just have one person who's on it. And me.
Okay, so you two are in good company. This is good. All right, so for this presentation, if you're not on 11 yet, there are going to be some things that you know about for older versions of Java. If you're on 11, you can start thinking about aligning code to the future. If you're on 12 to 16, you really should upgrade to either the LTS of 17 or the latest, because 12 through 16 aren't supported anymore. So whoever's on 15, you're on a non-supported version of Java and you really should upgrade. If you're on 17, congratulations, you can do all of your refactoring now. All right, for each topic we're going to cover today, we're going to start with an example. We're going to talk about the feature. We're going to talk about some opportunities for refactoring, what IDE support is available to help you with that, and what to do if you're on an older version of Java, aka what can you do today in order to get ready, besides learn from this presentation. Sound good? All right. And then you can ignore the stuff about the lab on Wednesday because you're not at KCDC and therefore not attending my lab. Okay, refactoring. We are writing legacy code now. All the code that you wrote at work today is legacy code, even to the person on Java 17. Legacy code is just code that's done. It's not inherently good or bad. Often when we talk about legacy code, it's like, oh, that legacy code, right? But it's okay. It may be good, it may be bad, it doesn't matter. Recognizing its legacy code helps position it for the future. You can refactor for things that exist now, right? We have renames, extract method, etc. But you can also refactor for future compatibility. That's where you look at a feature when you're writing code and say, okay, well, I know I'm on 11 at work, but if I were on a later version of Java, I would do it a different way. And then you type a to-do saying that. Then when you're on that version of Java and someone comes across it, they know there's a better way and can easily refactor to that and don't wonder whether it is appropriate. Our first feature today is text blocks and strings. We've got an example here of some fairly ugly code. This code is attempting to put a JSON string with a parameterized value inside a bunch of Java code. And we look at this and it's like, well, I hope it's right. And the compiler will tell me if it isn't. Yes. We've known for a long time that we don't want to write code like this. Okay, so what do we do about it? Well, we could put that whole query in a file, query.json, and read it in. Now the JSON is easier to read. However, we've replaced it with a whole page of code, and we've now made it a treasure hunt to find the query because it's no longer in the same file. The code may be easier to read, but whether it's better is something you could argue with your coworkers about through the end of time. Introducing text blocks. Text blocks were introduced in Java 15, and they let you introduce prettily your string into the code. You know it's a text block because it begins with 3 quotes and ends with 3 quotes. And then all of that ugly formatting and concatenation and everything else we saw is gone. You just get the string inside of those 3 blocks. Notice I said the string. It is a string literal. It has all the abilities of a normal string. You can call methods on it, you can concatenate it, you can pass things in it, you can do anything that you can do with a string. And this is a really important point because that makes it safe to refactor. You had a string before, you have a string now, but this string is easier to read. It so happens with this refactoring that I added some line breaks to the JSON to make it easier to read, but those line breaks weren't significant anyway. The JSON doesn't care if it has line breaks, so I view it as an equivalent refactoring. Let's look at the text block syntax. We have our 3 quotes at the beginning of the line. We have some text, and then we have 3 quotes to end it. We also have incidental white space. Incidental white space is white space that's not part of the string. It's just there because we as human beings have to look at it, and we'd like all of our lines to not start all the way on the right. I remember which way I'm looking. The way you figure out what incidental white space is is you draw a line at the leftmost character of your text block. Everything to the left of that is incidental white space. You can refactor the incidental white space. You can get rid of it. You can add more of it. As long as it's the same on each line, it doesn't exist. We also have the concept of essential white space. You draw that same line at the leftmost position of any characters. Everything to the right of that is essential white space, which is part of your string. I'd like my XML to remain indented. Thank you very much. Okay. Ending lines. You can end a line with nothing, which means you get an implicit line break. You can end it with a backslash, which says I don't want a line break. You can also have a \s. You can use that in regular strings too now. That means that I want a space. And in the text block, it also means that everything before it is also important. It's not just a stray character, it's part of your string. Okay. We got now an example of a new line. We have, after session, we have the explicit new line, the \n we wanted. Then we have another one because you get an implicit new line at the end of every line in your text block. If you want to escape quotes, you have two choices. You can escape just the first quote with the 3 quotes, or you can escape all of them. One of those is going to be easier to read than the others. So now we've got some opportunities. Externalized data is a big one. Why is the data externalized? Is it externalized for some good reason, in which case it should be there? We're getting it from some file system somewhere. Or was it only externalized because putting it in the code would have just been long enough? Expected values in JUnit are a great one. A lot of the time you have, well, I want this to happen and I want the golden nested pattern to work where I expect the results to be this long value. And now what do I do with it because it's hard to read? Putting those in the code is great. There's lots of formats of stuff that have a lot of special characters and we've historically moved out. CSVs, GraphQL, JSON, SQL, text, XML, YAML, there's lots of more. If you can think of any more, you put them in the chat. I'm not going to pause for that, but put them in the chat as you think of them. IDE support. In IntelliJ, you can replace a string, a long, ugly string, with a text block. It's a little finicky in terms of where you put the cursor. So if you don't get the choice right away to replace with a text block, just move the mouse around and try again. It took me twice before I got it, but it definitely works. And you can see it refactors the code nicely. I no longer have an ugly string. I have something that I can actually read. Eclipse does the same thing. Also, I had a couple places for it to work before I realized it wanted me to click the variable name. And again, it formats the string. It's got a couple of extra characters that I wouldn't have added because Eclipse and IntelliJ decided that since I didn't put \n in my original string, I didn't want any line breaks. That is the right call. You don't want your refactoring tool to change the behavior of the code. Turns out I don't care about the line breaks, so I don't need any of this, but it's not wrong. What if you're on an older version of Java? Well, we just discussed you can't use text blocks if you're on Java 14 or below, but you can get ready. You can say, I'm going to put the ugly string in the code, and I'm going to put a to-do comment saying, I know it's an ugly string. This should be a text block as soon as we get to 15 or 17. I'm going to keep saying 17 because I'm assuming you're on the long-term support version. Again, the person on 15 should upgrade. But it lets you say, okay, we're just going to live with this for a small amount of time. It is tech debt, but tech debt isn't bad. Tech debt is a statement that you're going into debt intentionally, right? A lot of you own houses. You got a mortgage to buy your house. You didn't say, oh my God, I have a mortgage. This is terrible. I have a mortgage. I'm going to make payments on it. Eventually, I'm not going to have a mortgage. I'm going to have some ugly code. When I upgrade to 17, I'm going to pay it off and use a text block. Now I don't have ugly code. This is okay. If you are unhappy about your mortgage, well, that was a choice. Does anyone have any questions about text blocks and strings before we move on to the next topic? Ooh. It's a good one. I can't believe I forgot about JDBC. Those are good examples.
And Jeanne, there is a way of doing something like string interpretation, right?
Yeah, just like with a regular string. It is a string.
Right.
Right? You have the %s and then you call string.format.
Yeah.
What it's not is a Python string or a Groovy string. I'm taking notes, by the way, so that I can include these questions in the actual presentation on Monday. You're making it better. Thank you. A lot of people, when they ask that question, are thinking about Python or Ruby, where I write $ variable and it expands it. That is not a thing in Java. It's a string. It has the same behavior as strings. It also has the same limitations as a string. And string has not magically acquired the ability to interpolate for free, but you can use formatted and have it do the replaces that way. Good question, Barry. That was also a perfect example and a preview for September. Starting in September, we're going to be having hybrid meetings where there are some people in the room that are not just us, and some people on YouTube that are not us. And the people in the room will be able to ask questions live by themselves, as Barry just demonstrated. That was the plan with the question, right, Barry?
Exactly.
Any questions on text box, please? All right, we're going to move on to topic number 2, instance of. You all are familiar with instance of, I hope. It's a part of Java. This is some code. It's been around through the dawn of time. We say to Java, hey, Java, is number an integer? It says yes. We go into the loop, into the if statement. And then we say, hey, Java, is number an integer? Well, yes. And then we cast it, and then we make the call. All right, that would be silly, right? If I had to talk to somebody and ask them the same question twice and they gave me the same answer, like, why are we doing this? It was an integer 1 line ago and nothing has happened in between. It's still an integer. That's what the new instance of lets us deal with. You now have a concept of a pattern variable where you give it a variable name in the if statement, and that says that it's an integer and you want num as int to represent your integer. You now get to treat it as an integer without having to keep asking Java whether it's an integer. It hasn't changed. All is good. There's also this concept of flow scope. With flow scope, Java is determining whether or not something is true. So in our first example here, we have is number a double. If it is, you can call d1.intValue on it, and all is fine because double is in fact an integer. This makes for some more concise code. We don't have the whole ceremony with the if statement and the cast and everything else. I'm going to ask our first question. This is a warm-up question and not eligible for the license, but do answer it because the next question will be harder and then you'll get in the habit of answering questions. Can anybody who's not Naya who has presented on this topic tell me what is wrong with example number 2? We've got similar code, num instance of double d2 or d2 int value mod 2 = 0, system out print line d2.int value. This is going to be good. When the audience is in the room, they're going to have a huge advantage on answering questions because they're not going to have the 10 to 20 second YouTube lag. Oh, fun! Longer lag. Barry, you still, Barry, you're typing in my presentation.
Oh, sorry about that.
I'm glad we didn't type the password to Talkie in here.
Alex was mentioning the issue there is the branch is not covered.
That is correct. We don't know that D2 is in fact a double, right? It could be, but it could not be because it's an OR. That would be dangerous and potentially leaving D2 undefined. So Java doesn't let you do that. Okay, now we have our first license question. If you answer this correctly, Neha will ask you whether you would like an IntelliJ license. The question is, does this compile? We have if num instance of double n, system out print line, n int value. If num instance of integer n, system out print line, n. That's why I read it out loud. I figured that would stall and buy some time.
Alex says this combined with double is bigger than integer covered all, and line 2 is understood.
Sorry, Alex, that is not correct. Double is bigger than integer. That is true. However, double does have an int value method on it that lets you convert to an integer, so it does compile. Or at least that part does compile. Would anyone else like to answer? Because I didn't say whether it compiles or not, I just said that that reasoning was wrong.
I think saying, valid scope of variable limited.
Ashish got it. This does compile. N is only in scope for the if statement. The if statements are independent of each other. Therefore, this code does compile, and he gets to win an IntelliJ license. We now have another question. I think there's 3, I don't remember, but all of them are eligible for IntelliJ licenses. The question here is, does this compile? If num instance of double n, system out print line n int value, system out print line n int value. The same question, yes or no, does this compile? And this is a great contest for winning a license, because even if you guess, you have a 50-50 shot. Although I do appreciate that people are saying why and not just yes or no.
Alex said this does not compile because n is out of scope. Can you repeat what I'm saying?
Yes, I will. Alex is correct. N is out of scope. As we discussed on the previous slide, n is only in scope on the if statement. And the last line of code here is not in the if statement, and therefore n does not compile. Good job, Alex. Okay, and now we've got one more. Does this compile? If not, num instance of double n return, system out print line n dot int value.
I have a couple of this one will not make up the other. Mohammed says no compilation.
Okay, Mohammed thinks it does not compile.
You say area out of bound exception. Alex saying it compiles because all branches are covered.
So we have a variety of answers so far. We have out of scope, we have array index out of bounds, we have compiles because all branches are covered.
Yeah. Bill says M not in scope.
Bill says it doesn't compile because n is not in scope. We do have a lot of answers. I'm going to jump to, does anyone have the right answer? So you can stop reading answers.
That's
This question is very tricky. So I'm going to give it 5 minutes or seconds or so. And if no one has the right answer, I'll explain it. Nope.
no compilation.
Okay. So we had someone who was really close, but not quite. This does compile, thanks to the joys of flow scoping. The rule is not that it's in scope like a local variable. The rule is that the compiler can guarantee that it will have a value. So that's what's happening here. The if statement says, is number a double? If it's not, return. That means that the last line of code is only executed if num is a double, and therefore it compiles. So that's a lot of fun with flow scoping because it's not intuitive to those of us who learned about scope with sets of squigglies. The first couple of times I heard this, it was like, this sounds crazy. I can't believe it works this way. I had that reaction when I heard about streams the first time too. And now that I've heard about it a bunch of times, I actually do feel like it makes sense. That said, while I feel like it makes sense, if someone wrote this on my team, I'd ask them to change it. Because it may make sense if you've looked at it a million times, but it certainly isn't intuitive, and there's no reason you need to write code like this. Okay, and then we have one more here. This one does not compile because n is still in scope for the reason discussed on the previous slide. All right, so opportunities. Library code is a really good use of instance of. You want to know what you have. Equals methods are a great example of equals of instance of. This equals method comes from the JDK, the equals method of string. And if you think about what equals used to do, we would say, all right, is it the same object, great, done, performance? Is it null? Return false. Is it the wrong type? Return false. Cast. All right, now we finally have two objects we can compare. Let's check their strings. Now it's much simpler. We're still checking if it's the same object for performance up front. Sure. That doesn't change the functionality, just makes it a little faster. Then we're checking if it's an instance of string, storing it in a string pattern variable, and checking the things are equal. There's no ceremony of fluff in here that's telling us what's going on. This is a really nice refactoring that becomes available to you in Java 17 or 16. Also worth noting is that, I think I have this on the next slide, but I'm not sure, so I'll say it now. A lot of us implemented equals using equals builder because it used reflection and we didn't need to do anything. And this was lovely. It is not on the next slide, it's later, but I'll finish my thought now. With equals builder, that's true, you didn't need to write an equals method. Unfortunately, it's getting progressively harder to use reflection in later versions of Java. So being able to write your own equals method becomes beneficial. IDE support. We've got an IntelliJ example.
We have a question.
Oh, question. What's the
And
question?
the question is the bytecode equivalent to a regular handwritten equals?
Yes, it is. It's already, instance of is already checking your null and your type. And if those things are not true, it's not setting the variable in the equals. So it's not setting string to be a value, it's just returning false and you're done. It's just you don't have to type as much code in order to make that happen. Excellent question, thank you.
And another question, what's so hard about using reflection?
Nothing's hard about using reflection. The problem is as you upgrade to later versions of Java, reflection becomes less and less allowed. So at some point equals builder will stop working. I don't know when that point is, but having less code that uses reflection will make your life easier in the long run. Great question. Barry, are we caught up on questions? Okay. So IDE support. We can refactor existing code that uses the whole casting ceremony in IntelliJ. You say you want to replace it with a pattern variable, and it does. I do not have an Eclipse slide. IntelliJ has better refactorings than Eclipse. That is one of the benefits of IntelliJ. And if you win a license, you can get to see that for yourself. If you're on an older version of Java, you can just note when you're writing the cast that, hey, this is an opportunity to use a pattern variable when we upgrade to Java 17. All is good. I'd ask if we have any questions on this topic, but we just got a bunch, so I feel like those were the questions on this topic, and I'm going to go on. Our next topic is switch expressions. We've all seen a switch case. We've been writing them since the dawn of time. You write your switch, you write your case, you forget your break, you wonder why it doesn't work properly, and then you add your break. That sounds about like the development process that we're used to. Okay.
We have one question.
yes.
Can you share any examples of generics and pattern matching?
Of what?
Pattern matching.
Oh, generics. That was the word I missed. I don't think. I'm thinking it doesn't work because you don't have the concept of the generic type at runtime, but I'm not sure. You know?
I don't think so.
Okay, so consensus in the room, I took a poll and 3 out of the 4 of us think it won't work and the 4th doesn't have an opinion.
Right.
The reason that we think it won't work is because the generic type is gone by runtime, so it wouldn't be able to work. Elena, if you wish to try it during the meeting, tell us if we're wrong.
How do you know?
Because I see, as I'm talking, I see Elena furiously typing something into her computer.
I have another question from
Sure.
Alex. So in case of a leaking variable, as far as I understand, bytecode will be actually different, like that variable should be hoisted in the bytecode.
I'm going to say it's equivalent. I don't know if it's identical, but it certainly does the same thing, so it should be equivalent. Any other questions? No? Okay. Elena's still doing her experiment, but I'm going to assume silence means everything is fine until she tells me otherwise. All right, so back to switch expressions. With switch expressions, you can write the code that we saw a few minutes ago on the previous slide in a much more concise fashion. You use the arrow operator, and now we don't have to have a break anymore. Yay! There's so much less ceremony here. You can really drill down into what's happening. If it's Hallmark, we return Kansas City. If it's Crayola, we return Pennsylvania. Otherwise, we return anywhere. Done. You'll also notice that this switch statement is returning a value. That's something we couldn't do with a traditional switch case. All right, now we have an example of a missing value. I have an enum. It has two values. And then I have a switch expression that handles one of those values and tries to assign the result. Alas, this does not compile. The reason it doesn't compile is because statement isn't, or expression are going to have a value if the other case isn't true. You have to either handle all the cases or have a default so that Java always knows what to do. And we have precedent for this. If you think about the ternary operator, you can't just write half of it, right? You can't say if value is this, then do this, bye. Java doesn't do like, but what if it's not? And that's what we're doing here. You have to be thorough in handling what's going on.
There's a question from Bodhi. Does the compiler check that the switch doesn't fall through?
Does the compiler check the switch doesn't fall through? There's no such thing as falling through with switch expressions. The arrow is saying this is what I want to happen in the end. Good?
Yep.
Okay. Talked about missing values. Now we have a feature that's not in Java 17. This is the only thing in my entire presentation that isn't available to you if you're in Java 17. I'm showing it here so we see the future and we know where pattern matching is going. It's currently in Java 19 preview. Note that with preview features, the syntax might change. In fact, it did. The syntax was different in the Java 18 preview. And that's what previews are for, that Java isn't committing to the thing long term. So pattern matching for switch with more data will exist, but we're not quite there yet. This example shows that you can use a case for a type. So if the type is different, you do a different thing. And the next example shows that you can even do conditions. So we have a case where it's an integer and it's odd, or it's an integer and it's even. You might notice I have a default there. That's because we don't know that it's an integer. And we established before that I have to handle all the cases. I can't just selectively ignore them. So it's cool, kind of cool this exists, and it's good to know about that one day we'll be able to do this. So opportunities. If you see a lot of if else's in a row, they had a little to do. We're going to have a switch expression here one day. You have a switch statement with many breaks, same thing. I have a switch expression, a switch statement rather, in my Java 11 code at work that has 13 branches to it. I don't want to replace it with a map because I don't feel like that would be clearer to read, but my God, it's ugly. It would be much better with a switch expression. It also sets the stage for the advanced matching that we just saw. Something to look forward to there. Okay, we've got IDE support. Again, in IntelliJ, you click on an ugly switch statement and it offers to change it for you. Eclipse does not do that. Again, add for IntelliJ. And if you're on an older version of Java, just leave a little to do saying this is the future.
I have a few questions now.
Awesome.
When is a keyword now? I think it's introduced in 19. Positional keyword or a regular one?
It's not a regular keyword. If you named your variable on when, you're still fine.
Okay. Mockito library is broken once again after Kotlin. I think it's the second. There's another question though. Before you said switch returns a value. If it prints a line, what is it returning?
It doesn't have to return a value. It can return a value. So if it prints a line, then you're not going to store it in a variable because that wouldn't make sense and it wouldn't return a value.
Can it print a line and then return a value?
Yeah, you can use squigglies and have it do a block of code as well. There's also an operator called yield, which I don't get into here, when you have a block that you can say you want it to return a value and yield it from your block to the switch expression.
So is yield doing the same thing as the arrow thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like you're breaking out of the block, because when you're in a block, you can't just type the keyword, like return value and expect something to happen. Kind of like when you're in a Lambda, if you're in a block, you have to have a return because you're in the Lambda and you need it passed out. So Elena had a question or observation.
I have an observation about the so as expected, it doesn't work. However, it doesn't work in the most intuitive way possible.
Okay, so far Elena has told us it doesn't work if you try to use generics with instance of. However, it sounds like there is a surprise coming.
The way it fails is type, the generic type you're trying to pass cannot be safely passed to whatever you're
Mhm.
trying to use in scope to. However, if you just give a question mark, a single question mark, a word, that's equivalent to everything, then works fine. But question mark extend or a question mark super will not work with the same unincluded thing. Basically, don't.
Wow, so that is an interesting thing to paraphrase. First of all, we have, if you use a non-generic version, it complains that you're doing that. But if you use a question mark to tell it, I thought about generics, leave me alone, it's okay, because now you've got a list of whatever. But then if you start trying to improve it by using question mark extends or whatever, it no longer works, and you should never do this. Did I get all that, Elena? All right.
And the reason it actually doesn't work is the
So when we took a little poll in the room about whether generics and instance of works, and we all said no, we were right. And Elena's experiment reinforces that you should just take that at face value and not bother trying it, because it leads you down a rabbit hole of interesting facts that you don't want on your project. Do we have any other questions in the chat room?
No.
Okay. Our next topic is records. Records allow us to write code concisely. But let's start with an example of the past. I have a class here called book. It has two attributes, title and number of pages. Those are reasonable things to want in a class. Okay, then I start writing the class. I have a constructor, takes those two things. I have getters. I would have an equals hash code and toString, but I ran out of space on the slide, and that completes my class. How many of those things are actually important? Well, we've got title and num pages, and then we have a lot of code. Rewriting that example with records is 2 lines, one of which is a squiggly brace and could go in the first line. So I'm going to say this is 1 line. Everything that I just talked about is in this class. It's automatically provided for you. You don't have to write equals, you don't have to write hash code, you don't have to write toString, and you don't have to write your accessors. Equals and hash code and toString just use all the attributes, assuming you want them all. So we got our new type, record, works like class, interface, whatever, and it gave us a lot of stuff. We have an immutable object here, and we don't have to type a lot in order to make it work. To use the record, I create a new book, just like I normally would, and then I access the attributes. This is the only thing about records that you might be surprised about. The attribute is accessed not by a getter, but by the name of the attribute. We've got title instead of get title. That's the only difference. That's something that's good to be aware of in terms of forward compatibility.
I have a question.
Yes.
Is there any advantage to them having made that decision that we know of? That you don't say get title, you just say dot title?
I'm sure there is, but I don't know what it is. I'm going to find out though, because I'm sure someone's going to ask me. Okay, and this is what the toString outputs. It's perfectly reasonable default for toString. You can override it if you don't like it, but you don't have to.
I have a question from Alex. Just as a refresher, if I use a record with integer array field, the contents of that field are still mutable?
Yes. Similarly, if you use a list or any other immutable object, it's just making sure that you don't have setters. It's not making sure you don't change the references. And just like you would have had to if you're writing a class, you need to write a constructor that makes a copy of it or a getter that makes a copy of it. You can override any of these things in a record. I don't get into that here because I'm trying to teach records. I'm trying to show refactorings for the future, but there's definitely longer talks, including the one on Wednesday that you're not going to get to see, that do that. But you absolutely can. You just have to be conscious of it. And again, you did that in classes too. It's just making sure there's no setters for you. Are there any other current questions in the chat?
You're good.
Okay. For opportunities. If you have an immutable POJO, you can make it a record. A lot less code, a lot less wondering, and it makes the code coverage tool happy. We've all looked at a code coverage tool where it's like the code coverage for your generated, mind you, equals method is low. Please fix. Yeah. I didn't write the message. I don't want to test it. It is going to be pain. Not having the message makes it so much better. You don't have to write equals in hash code. We talked about the reflection thing earlier. Make the code coverage tool happy. and numerous other benefits. You can think of any if you put them in the chat.
I have another question from Alex. If I override the get method, it will be the plain field name or a regular getter?
You need to override the method that's provided. So if you want to override title, you have to override the method name title. If you want to write your own method called get title, you can absolutely do that. However, you can't use an add override on it because it's a new method that just happens to have a getter at the beginning of it. But the method is name title. Any other questions so far? All right, we're good on questions. So refactoring. In a trend here, IntelliJ can mostly convert the record for you. You click on the name of the class that you think should be a record, and it says, oh, this looks similar enough. I'll try to make it a record for you. I did have one shortcoming though. When I did this, it kept my equals method inside of the record, got rid of everything else, but it kept the equals method because it thought it was custom. But what was interesting about it is that I used IntelliJ to generate that equals method maybe 3 seconds earlier. So it didn't recognize its own equals method as a default method of implementation of equals. I found that a little entertaining. And unsurprisingly, Eclipse doesn't offer this feature at all. IntelliJ rocks. So if you're on an older version of Java, what can you do? The first thing is, as you're writing POJOs, you can make sure that people know that they should be records in the future and make them forward compatible, right? So you saw here, I'm using title instead of get title. So that way, when it's time to replace this with a record, I don't have to make any changes. I know when I type this, there are no callers. That is the best time to choose my method names because I don't have to find the callers. I don't have to hope they're in another project because then I have to deprecate them and I'm going to have the getter method forever. Right, so starting out with this allows you to take care of that. There is one shortcoming. Some static analysis tools get upset if you use the same instance variable name and method name. If that happens, you have to suppress the warning and be like, yes, I did this on purpose. Oh, and also make sure to use all of your fields in equals and hash code. You don't want to change the meaning of equals and hash code later. That's just no end of problems.
There's a question that I think I missed about the var keyword. Why compiler doesn't give any errors when adding a different values to linked list?
Say that again.
Related to var keyword, why the compiler doesn't give any errors when adding different values to the linked list?
It does if you use, so why doesn't the compiler give errors if you add different values to the linked list? It does if you use generics. I mean, I understand the words, but I don't understand the question. So we're going to need whoever it is to type it using more words. Sorry. In the meantime, we have our last section, which is on APIs. What are some new APIs that you can call? First one is toList. When you're using a stream, it ends with this nice ceremony. Collect collectors toList. That works. But starting in Java 16, you can just write to list, which is a lot shorter. So nice to know that that's available to us. There's also teeing collectors. If you need to go through your stream multiple times, you can't because streams are a one pass thing. With the teeing collector, you can have 2 different collectors and merge them at the end, which is a nice feature. You don't need it often, but it's nice if you're doing something like paging and you're going to want to keep track of 2 different things. Formatting a string. You can use string.format like we always have, but you can also call .formatted on the string itself. Makes the code a little more concise, a little more OO. We've got a number of format characters here. These haven't changed, but I wanted to put them here since we were talking about formatting as a review of what you could do. We've got strings, numbers, characters, floats, new lines, nice stuff. And we've got some examples of formatting. This is the old world of how you do formatting. The formatted is new. The fact that you can do formatting is not. What is new is compact number. Compact number lets you output a human readable version of your number. I work for a bank. I use large numbers all the time. Writing out your numbers is not fun because there are lots of numbers in them. And people don't like reading things with lots of numbers in them. Then you have to use a custom formatter, and with compact number, it's built in. You use the compact number formatter, number format, get compact number formatter, and you tell it the length you want, short, long. So here we're going to format a million. And you can see I can do a short one, 1M, or the long one, which I like better because it's in English, 1 million. Nice to be able to print out large numbers without any ceremony. There's also a file of mismatch method, which tells you when your two files differ. Is it at the beginning? Is it at the end? What should I expect? And that concludes the formal part of this presentation. We're going to do one more call on questions. Right, because people haven't even heard that there's one more call on questions. I wouldn't expect them to have their last questions in there.
But it will be better when they are in person, right?
Yeah, because then the in-person people can ask questions first. I'm really excited for our first in-person meeting.
The person people get to ask questions first.
Oh, no, it's not unfair at all because everyone has the opportunity to come. So I totally want to favor the in-person people. There's a lot of benefits to being in person. You get to meet people, you get to network, you get to learn about jobs, you get the opportunity to win books and physical objects, you can get pizza. There's definitely a benefit to being an in-person person. Not today at our full meeting. You'll have to come back, Elena. But now that I'm sure it is in there that I've asked for questions.
So I think Alex is saying that are the records similar to case classes in Scala? I think they are.
I don't know, Scala. You know Scala?
Yeah, I think
Great, you
they
get to
are.
answer the question.
They are the same
Okay.
concept, yeah.
Neha says to Alex, yes, they are the same concept as case classes in Scala. I learned something new.
I learned the painful lesson in how they're different from data classes in Kotlin.
Why don't you come closer and tell us? Because this sounds like something I'm not going to want to repeat.
All right.
This is Elena.
Hello, I am Babe. I learned a painful lesson about how Java records are different from data classes in Kotlin. Java records are always immutable, except for array, collection patterns and such. And Kotlin classes can be either mutable or immutable, depending on the preference. So that leads to some differences in behavior.
Cool. Thank you, Elena.
But I have another point to make, like even though records in general are immutable, if you have a list
Yes.
in them, you can still modify the list without changing it.
Correct. It's only the references that are immutable in records. If you have an array or a list or any other immutable object, you have to override the constructor and the getter to make it be a copy or actually immutable. Similarly, if you put mutable objects in your list, now you have to make copies of those.
Yeah.
But again, this has always been true. This is true in classes too. What it's doing is making you not have to worry about the references in the record itself.
So another question that came up is like, what are the use cases for sealed classes? Where would you want to think about plugging in them in?
I love that sealed classes didn't come up because they are in the Wednesday presentation and not in this one. The use case I can think of for sealed classes is library design.
Mhm.
In library design, you want to have a finite number of subclasses and you want to control them. So you want to make it open to subclassing so that you can write those subclasses, but you don't want more people extending your class or implementing your interface. On a business project, I don't think it's useful, but for libraries, I totally do.
Alex is saying, so records are still the classes, those are not vectorized in memory just yet.
Correct. Records are classes. They're classes where you don't have to do so much typing and code generating, but they are still classes.
Ashish has a question. Any behind the scenes compiler or native code optimizations?
No, I don't think there's any behind the scenes compiler or native code optimizations. I'd also like to point in records are essentially POJOs. They are not the bottleneck in your code. Are we running out of questions?
I think we are good now.
All right, so we are out of questions. I'm going to do a bit of closing remarks, which is similar to the opening remarks. Our next meeting is on August 16th. It is going to be a betterment. The link to sign up is in the chat, or at least was in the chat. Hopefully it'll be in the chat again soon. This is going to be an in-person only meeting. If you wish to come, you need to sign up and come in person. We're going to be playing a technical networking game so we can get to know each other, learn some fun facts, win some prizes. We're giving away a copy of this book I've been taunting with you all presentation, probably some more IntelliJ licenses, and get to know each other and rebuild as a community. Then in September, we're going to have our first real hybrid meeting where attendees are both in the room and online with an actual speaker. That's not one of us. And we'll be announcing that towards the end of August or in early September, along with the date. And then after that, we'll continue on with hybrid meetings where you can come in person or you can come online. Prizes will be in person. Food will be in person. The ability to meet people will be in person. Home, you get to sit in your pajamas. But this isn't an everybody's equal thing. We want to encourage people to come, and we want to try to rebuild our local community here in the New York City, New Jersey, and tri-state area. Does anyone else on the leadership team want to say anything that I left out?
There are a number of questions came up after that.
Okay, question time. That gives Barry a few minutes to think if I left anything out.
So, is there anything on multi-threading in Java 17? Any updates or improvements that you can think of?
There probably are improvements to multi-threading between Java 12 and 17, but I can't think of any off the top of my head.
And somebody asked about the vector API. Is it still being developed, or there are any new enhancements?
I don't know anything about the vector API either. I'm appreciating that we have a lot of questions here that are outside the scope of the talk.
Yeah, it's a different vector in Project Loom, right? That's not the same exactly. That's coming. Yeah.
Elena says vector and Loom is coming.
I don't
No.
know about that. Right?
Oh.
About the, multi-threading thing.
Oh, other threading things are coming. Gotcha. Yes, agreed.
I have
Which is not in Java 17.
I have a snippet of code sent by someone. And he's asking why does it compile?
So we have a list of strings, and then we're trying to add a string to it, and then we're trying to add a number to it. Okay, I see what's going on here. What you have here is a list of strings, but you also have an array. An array sort of predated generics, and with arrays, things continue to work and not have backward compatibility with generics. So once you have involved an array into the equation, you sort of lose the ability of the compiler to keep track of the generic type, and code like whoever that was wrote becomes legal. Obviously, we wouldn't write code like that in our project, but it does in fact compile, and you can blame the array for it.
Another question is, any changes to the Java executor service?
Are there any changes to the Java executor service? I don't remember. Elena says that's September too. Java 17's been out a while, so I did release notes when it came out, and then I remembered the parts of it that I used. Are we out of questions again? Okay, Barry, are there any other closing remarks that I left out?
Barry says no.
Barry says no. Awesome. All right, that concludes our meeting. I hope to see you in person later in the month. It's been really awesome seeing our co-leaders and Elena. Thank you for the space again, in person, and starting off our journey to rebuilding our in-person and local community. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. I've posted the link if they send an email for info@javasig.com for the winners.
Awesome. Thanks, all.
Why would you want to do something?
It's more fun.